got just over half of the folks that registered have joined us. We've got a pretty tight schedule today, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So I'll just start by saying thank you everyone joining Midtown Alliance and the City of Atlanta today to learn about the Central Midtown Connection Plan. Midtown Alliance works as an implementation partner with the city to make this a livable, lovable place for those who live and work and play here. In line with the city's commitment to Vision Zero and the Midtown Transportation Plan, we are constantly working to improve our streets to make them safer, more accommodating to everyone who lives and visits here. The Central Midtown Connection Plan aims to provide a desirable east-west connection for pedestrians, bikes, scooters, and everything in between from 10th and Myrtle, west to Williams and the 10th Street Bridge project. The proposed route crosses some upcoming streetscape projects, including Piedmont, Juniper, and West Peachtree, as well as the recently completed Spring Street protected bike lane. It also provides easy access to key Midtown destinations, including Piedmont Park, the Beltline, several residential and commercial buildings, shops surrounding the intersection of Piedmont and 10th, Marta's Midtown Station, and tons of retail along Peachtree Place, including a key Publix grocery store. Today, we'll spend about 30 minutes going over the findings of our multimodal traffic survey and presenting the initial concept for the corridor. Once we wrap that up, we'll move into about 30 minutes of questions from the public. We do have a large group today, so to make things as efficient as possible, please enter your questions into the questions tab located in your control panel. We will address as many questions as possible after the presentation, but just please make sure you're dropping those questions into the questions tab where we can monitor and respond to them in an organized way and not the chat tab. If you accidentally put your questions in the chat tab, we'll still see them at the end of the presentation. We just won't respond to them during the presentation. So those that we're unable to get to will be put in a question and answer document and provided written responses posted to the project page. For those who would like to learn more or ask additional questions in person, I will also be available at 2 upcoming Midtown transportation events that we are hosting to celebrate Bike to Work Week next week. So on Tuesday the 17th, I will be available from about 8:30 to 9:30 at the 10th and Charles Allen entrance to Piedmont Park during Midtown Transportation's Bikes and Breakfast event. And then on Friday the 20th, I'll be available at the end of their bike maintenance class at around 12:45. So you can kind of keep an eye on Midtown social media accounts or visit the Midtown Transportation webpage to learn more about those fun events and everything else they have going on. We will also have a virtual map dot exercise on the project page for the Central Midtown Connection Plan. That'll be posted in the next day or so, so keep an eye out for that. We'll be joined today by myself, Julie Harlan. I'm a project manager with Midtown Alliance. On the line, we also have Addie Weber with the Tool Design Group, Chris Puglisi with Tool Design Group, and Jeff War from Jacobs Engineering. During the Q&A, we'll also have kind of additional resources as needed from Chris Rome from the City of Atlanta Department of Transportation, and Dan Horrigan, our Director of Transportation at Midtown Alliance. So with that, I will hand it over to Addie to get us on presentation.
Great, thank you, Julie, and hopefully everybody can see me and hear me. I am going to give a little bit of process to date. I know Julie mentioned the importance of this key east-west connection, and wanted to talk a little about how we've gotten to here. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what you're viewing on my screen, this is called a Miro board. It's a great place to capture a lot of feedback in real time so that folks know that we're listening to what they're saying, and we can walk through and backtrack as needed as we move through the presentation. So this study didn't just pop out of the clouds. It came in the 2017 Midtown Alliance Transportation Plan. It was identified as a route, in addition, preferred route to 10th Street that provides a lot more comfort and access to cyclists. And then in 2019, there was a community survey where the Midtown community was asked about where should investments, transportation investments come in, and a lot of people mentioned walking, biking, and cycling. Also in 2019, and some of you may remember, there was the 10th Street pop-up, which looked at how do we potentially extend the 10th Street cycle track, and that is one of the projects that's most mentioned by folks when speaking about an east-west connection. The project purpose is really fivefold, and Julie mentioned several of those. Safe space for cyclists and micromobility users. It's really important not only just to be safe, but also comfortable. Improve safety, comfort, and access for pedestrians. This is for all ages. Enhance the pedestrian and ground floor retail experience. Identify placemaking opportunities along the corridor. There's some great opportunities that exist today and in the future. We want to make sure we leverage those opportunities to create a really robust experience. And then finally, support the city's Vision Zero policy, which is a great way to look at zero crashes in our city and a path forward. This project is one of many Midtown Alliance is working on. We have the Piedmont Avenue Complete Street Project. We have the Juniper Street Complete Street Project. We have Commercial Row, which is happening at Peachtree Place between Cypress or Crescent and Peachtree Street. And then to the west, we have both West Peachtree and Spring Street Quick Build, and then the 10th Street Bridge Enhancement Project, which will pick up right where William and Peachtree Place meet. And again, this takes us from the Myrtle 10th Street cycle track all the way over to William and Peachtree Place. Where we are in this process, we started off last year reaching out to some key stakeholders along the corridor. We also did a walking audit with the team to identify opportunities and brainstorm potential solutions. From that walking audit, we moved forward with a multimodal analysis report, more of which you can find on the website. That really gave us direction on what was really feasible within the corridor, and we'll be walking through that momentarily. And since that time, we've been really starting to lay out what the conceptual design could be. This is still moving forward to refinement. And so here we are today. We are round 2 of stakeholder interviews in the virtual open house. Moving forward from this process, we'll refine the conceptual design and move into schematic design, and then move to the approved concept presentation. Funding and implementation has not yet been approved. It is part of the TSPOS 2.0, so get out and vote later this month. That will be on the ballot for TSPOS. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who is going to walk through the numerous alternatives that we reviewed as part of our multimodal analysis. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Addie. Yeah, so as Addie said, we had a lot of alternatives and a lot of scenarios that we walked through as a part of laying out these bike lanes. This sort of outlines our screening process. There was a slide earlier with 5 potential routes that go through a lot of intersections and have a lot of different ways that a bike lane could move through those spaces. So we have this process where we started out with that list of feasible routes. We screened them and assessed them for measures of safety and connectivity and comfort and directness. We took some of the routes that came out of that screening and put together some sketch plans to inform some additional analysis, where we looked at things like reassessing the safety and evaluating traffic movements and multimodal wait times. And from that point, we moved into our recommendations. But I'm going to step through each of these steps here to kind of give a better overview. So as the alternative screening began, we took a look at industry guidelines that pointed us to some top measures for effective networks as being safety, comfort, and connectivity. Along with directness, we use these measures to screen those routes. For the safety measure, that being important to Midtown and to the Vision Zero goals of the city, we decided to take a look at the number of conflicts and the severity of conflicts between vehicles and bikes that could potentially happen along those routes. And that was important, especially when we started to look into the crash histories and saw that 46% of the bike crashes around this area resulted in some sort of injury for the cyclist. Taking a look at those, we did take an inventory of those potential conflicts and sort of looked at the control that was in place and what sort of volumes could be in conflict at each of those. For comfort, we used an industry measure called level of traffic stress, and it's a recognized measure for relating rider comfort to things like vehicular volumes and speeds and the presence of on-street parking, the type of bicycle lane that could be designed, as well as how separated it is from the adjacent traffic lanes. The outcome of that measure is sort of a 1 to 4 grade, with 1 being a low stress network that would attract an interested but concerned cyclist, and a 4 being sort of a high stress area for cyclists that may appeal to the more strong and fearless rider. This married well with Midtown's transportation plan goals of low stress bike networks and appealing to the vast, interested but concerned group of riders. And directness, we also had as a measurement, mostly as a measurement of the attractiveness of some of these routes. One of the things that the routes had in common was that all of them do take place on Peachtree Place, and we knew that it's been a question as to why not go directly from the 10th Street Bridge to Piedmont Park. And this was something that was considered very early on. And the project was able to use a good deal of 10th Street east of Peachtree Road, but the section west of there and around the interchange had several challenges that made Peachtree Place more appealing. The high volumes in that area required a greater separation, and the physical straits made those buffers somewhat infeasible without significant amounts of capital being used for redesigning the roadway and drainage and grading and utilities and landscaping changes. And this was likely also the rationale used when the Cycle Atlanta Plan 1.0 looked at the 8th Street and 12th Street routes. Alternatively, Peachtree Place does provide a lot of additional access to some existing and future retail and residential properties, and has a lower volume of vehicle conflicts, which is again appealing to that interested but concerned cyclist group, and has places for space for placemaking opportunities, as well as still provides that access to the Marta station and the Georgia Tech shuttle. The outcome of this screening, and we've put this map up here. This is a map of level of traffic stress based on the prevailing volumes and speeds and the type of facility that could feasibly be built on each of these routes. So as sort of an example of one of the screenings that was done. But out of this, alternative 2 was removed, which takes place on Peachtree Place. And one of the bigger reasons for that was the higher level of traffic stress due to high volumes and low separation that could be provided on that street. Myrtle and 8th Street routes also would require some mixing of traffic with less dedicated space to cyclists, as well as longer distances and significantly longer travel times. And when we were taking a look at those travel times, especially on 8th Street, we did account for things like grade and what would a typical intersection delay might be like for a signal. So, well, we can go to the next slide. The routes that did emerge out of that, which we call alternative 1 and 3, were carried into the sketch plan phase. These routes both use 10th Street and Peachtree Place, and the difference being as to whether they're going to transition at Crescent Street as in alternative 1 or Juniper Street as in alternative 3. The main question between these two routes at this point then was how was the bicycle lane going to be positioned along 10th Street, the various lane configurations and patterns that could accommodate travel at the intersections and at those transition points, and just several methods of signalized crossings, especially along 10th Street. So this screening produced 6 main scenarios for detailed evaluation. The main differences between these 6 is which side of 10th Street is going to be utilized, and how would that transition, especially at the Juniper and Piedmont intersections. So on the left-hand side, we've got alternative 1A and 3A. Alternative 1 being that route 1 that uses Crescent, and alternative 3 being the route that uses Juniper. Both of these would cross at the Piedmont intersection first onto the south side of 10th Street and then continue west. 1B and 3B would continue the cycle track as a 2-way facility along the north side of 10th and then cross it at Juniper. And we had a third option of 1C and 3C, which had a bicycle lane on both sides of 10th Street, the north side and the south side, and offered crossing opportunities at both the Juniper and Piedmont intersections. And here's where we moved into the detailed analysis. And each of the scenarios was again reassessed for the type and severity of conflict point. Assessed for pedestrian and cyclist wait times at intersections and changes to vehicle operations. The scenario that did result in being recommended as the best scenario between those 6 was alternative 1C. It includes directional lanes on 10th Street. It had the lowest severity of driveway conflicts, and with those lanes being directional on either side of 10th Street, relied a lot less on drivers looking for cyclists approaching from their right-hand side. It also provided the ability to add some safety through a bike-only crossing at the Piedmont intersection, which is a slight variation between this iteration and what you'll see in the concept plans. And it was also shown to keep vehicle stacking within the current distances between Juniper and Piedmont better than some of the other alternatives. And utilizing Crescent as 1C as opposed to 3C did help us avoid some private property conflicts that the Juniper route couldn't avoid. Right. I think I can certainly go into questions as far as more of the analysis, but I'm going to turn it over to Chris now and to go over the concept.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'm going to walk through the concept starting at 10th and Myrtle, where the existing 2-way cycle track ends. And so we plan to continue the 2-way cycle track to Piedmont Avenue. Just want to point out that we're currently just showing a generic buffer treatment as white striping. However, We have yet to select a buffer type and material because that will be defined as we complete the concept based on funding and geometric constraints. So that's what that is when you see that. As we migrate over to Piedmont Avenue, this is where we intersect the Piedmont Avenue planned bicycle lane and complete street project. One of the things that we did here was we transitioned from a two-way cycle track on the east side to directional bike lanes on the west side. And we use a diagonal crossing to get the eastbound cyclists over. So there will be a dedicated bicycle scramble phase that will permit that diagonal crossing. We also wanted to create an intuitive connection from Piedmont Avenue bicycle lanes to the 10th Street bicycle lanes as well. And we do that by tying into the existing intersection crossings there with the bike lane. As we progress over, we have directional bike lanes on the block between Piedmont and Juniper Street. You'll notice there are alternating left turn bays for the eastbound left at Piedmont and the westbound left at Juniper. That was a result of the traffic study and also some lessons learned from the demonstration project. So we wanted to provide turn storage at both of those intersections to help alleviate some of the queuing that was a result from that project. We also need to accommodate the fire trucks leaving the fire station. So we will be looking at the turning movements of fire trucks coming in and out and making sure that the facility doesn't impact emergency operations. We'll also be looking into a floating bus stop near the residential building at the corner of 10th and Juniper to accommodate their accessibility needs as well. As we tie into the Juniper Street intersection, there will be the Juniper Streetscape project, which will include a southbound bike lane on the west side. That project also has some new signal phasing, so there will be protected bicycle crossings going southbound as well as going eastbound. So there'll be a protected right turn signal phase and a southbound right turn signal phase that will help time separate the bicycle movements with those turning movements. We also transitioned back to a two-way cycle track, this time on the south side, as we position the bicycle lanes to get access to Peachtree Place. And there is a nice, robust buffer between the two-way cycle track and this section of 10th Street, which carries a little bit heavier volume than to the east. As we progress over to the Peachtree Street intersection, we are proposing new signal phasing here as well. There will be time separated eastbound right and westbound left movements with the bicycle movements. So there will be some safety added there. There is also a turn box provided just to the south of the crossing that will allow cyclists to continue north on Peachtree Street. Or if they would like to continue west onto 10th Street and go directly down 10th Street, that box is also provided there as well. As we continue west, we now ramp up onto the sidewalk as we prepare to turn south on Crescent. What's shown here is a proposed condition as part of the Stratus development. There will be one-way southbound on Crescent Street with also this very wide and long raised table crossing mid-block that will create a pedestrian space, and then we will have a shared use path along the eastern side of Crescent Street to go down. There'll be a 12 to 14 foot wide shared use path / sidewalk to get cyclists down to Peachtree Place, where they will then enter directional bike lanes on either side of Peachtree Place at the intersection with Crescent. This design minimizes impacts to the newly constructed commercial row project. There's also a newly upgraded driveway apron just to the west there that provides ADA compliance for the sidewalk going across that apron, which will be preserved in this design. And that apron actually does lead us to this design choice of having the parking on the inside of the bike lane, just so that we can provide that, keep that ADA compliance across that driveway. We've also introduced a chicane as we continue west to help calm traffic. Currently, Peachtree Place is a very long and straight street with nothing to really slow vehicles down. So we wanted to introduce some curves here in order to calm traffic. As we continue west, we now enter near the Midtown Marta station. As you can see, we've added 3 new crosswalks as part of this project, one at Cypress Street, and then 2 at the Marta station on either end of the facility to accommodate existing pedestrian crossings that occur today. There's also space for the Georgia Tech trolley that can pull off to the side and dwell there. And we ramp the bicycle lane around it up onto the sidewalk. And there's an example above showing what a floating bus stop may look like. We've introduced another chicane on the other side of the Marta station, again to calm traffic. We've preserved space for the parklet that's currently being used by dancing goats, so that space will be preserved. We've also maintained some loading zone for future retail needs. That could be a parklet, it could be valet, it could be parking, loading, but that is there for future retail needs as well. As we continue to the intersection with West Peachtree Street, we've done a lot of attention to this intersection. It's currently skewed, so we wanted to better align the eastbound and westbound approaches. This will help direct traffic to where they need to be and also make pedestrians and cyclists a little bit more visible as vehicles now need to make 90-degree turns at this intersection. We've also expanded or proposing to expand some of the sidewalk space, especially on the tight corners on the northeast and northwest side, and create some expanded bump outs where there is unused space as part of the overlapping design of this project and the West Peachtree Street Complete Street project. The green shaded area you see are actually intermediate level bike lanes. This was done for a number of reasons. One, it was to clearly delineate where cyclists ought to be. It also helps, it has a detectable edge so that blind pedestrians know that there is a difference in use as they start to walk between the sidewalk and the intermediate level bike lanes, and it will guide them to appropriate crossing locations. It also requires less right-of-way to construct ramps and loading zones, landing areas in this with this treatment, as there are incremental declines in elevation as you go across the bike lane and then down to the street. So it does require a little less right-of-way than if we were to have fully depressed bicycle lanes through here. We've also, if you scroll back, we also have a floating bus stop for the current commuter bus as well that we provided space for just south of the intersection. That's delineated in that red color. So there'll be room for any sort of bus stop amenities or space for buses to pull off if they need to. As we continue west, we maintain 2 loading zones on this block, one on the west side and on the east side. The one for the east side is mainly for retail deliveries. That was stressed that was important to their business function, so that was maintained. And then the one on the west side is for rideshare for the student tower that is on that side of the building. Those are outside the bicycle lane with a nice buffer zone for doors opening as well. This design does require the removal of parking and some of the bump outs along the south side of the street. However, there is free parking in the plaza garage to accommodate those needs. As we continue across the intersection with Spring Street, there is a future signal planned for this intersection, which will help make this crossing safer. This intersection also has sort of a protected intersection design. We're using intermediate level bike lanes on the south side only, where we've had some right-of-way constraints. And then fully depressed bicycle lanes on the north side where we weren't as constrained. And as we continue west, this block of Peachtree Place is planned to be converted to two-way as part of another project. So that is shown here. It is just two-way up until the Modera garage entrance in the back, and then it's still one-way outbound onto William Street. We connect to the 10th Street Bridge project here at William Street. The eastbound bike lane actually ramps up onto the sidewalk level and then comes back down. This was a way to avoid a lot of utilities, including fire hydrants and water vaults along the south side of this block. We've also provided space as shown in the hashed out areas to the east for future parklets or bicycle lit lane parking, corrals, or things of that nature. So that could be dedicated space for the community. And I think that's it for the walkthrough of this concept.
Great, thank you, Chris and Jeff.
Oh, sorry, Addie.
Go ahead, Julie. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so with that, thank you, Chris, Jeff, and Addie for walking us through this design. With that, we will open it up to questions from the community. Quite a few have come in during the presentation. So if you pop open your questions box, which if you see it in kind of your control panel, there's a kind of box with an arrow on the left and an X to the right. If you click on the box with the arrow, it'll kind of make that question screen larger and you can see kind of the conversations that have been going on during the presentation. So we've gotten quite a few great questions. So I'm just going to start answering some of the ones that haven't been answered in text at this point. The street signal that will be installed at Peachtree Place in spring, that project should be hopefully coming on in the next few months. It's a separate project. You can learn more about it on our project page. It's called the Last Mile Project. So if you go to midtownatl.com/projects, lists all of those things we're working on. You stay up to date on the process there, but it's definitely one that we know is really, really needed and desired. I walk across that intersection daily, and we know it's not fun. So hopefully soon. Let's see. We have had some questions about the barrier protection, both material and the need to stop cars from parking in the bike lane like they do. So wherever we can along this corridor, we're going to provide the highest level of protection that we can. What that exactly looks like at this point, it's too early to say. So yeah, I mean, we're going to do what we can. The other piece that we have really tried to bake into this plan is understanding that there's a lot of competing needs for the curb. And so trying to accommodate for the need for temporary loading wherever possible for residences and businesses along this corridor, we think will offset some of that behavior. We've got a question, Chris or Jeff, about bike signals at the intersections along the route. We've had one kind of just about where those signals will exist, and then another one kind of about how to reduce kind of right turn conflicts. So where there will be permissive right turns versus no turns on right.
Yeah, so we're proposing I'll start at Piedmont, going in the order that I walked through the concept. So at Piedmont, there will be a bicycle signal for a diagonal crossing. However, the northbound cyclists and westbound cyclists will run concurrently with vehicles. However, there will be some no turns on reds to help mitigate the conflicts with right turning vehicles and cyclist staging to turn. The turning volumes here were low enough that recommended thresholds weren't really met for complete phase separation of those movements. Going over to Juniper, there were significantly more turning conflicts, and so the proposal there is to have time-separated bicycle movements and conflicting right and left turn movements. Part of that is part of the Juniper Street project, and then part of that will be part of our project. So those movements will be protected. And then at Peachtree Street, we plan on having a dedicated bicycle phase that will be separate from the conflicting eastbound right and westbound left turn phases. And then at Spring Street and West Peachtree Street, we're not proposing signal modifications there. We went with a protected intersection design. The volumes here are significantly lower than along 10th Street. So we're doing a lighter touch in terms of traffic signals and instead just opting for a more visible approach as cyclists and pedestrians cross this intersection and make them a little bit safer with design.
Thanks, Chris. While I've got you unmuted, we have a question about kind of the look of the map, just to clarify what the blue lines along here mean versus kind of the green. Just go, if we could do a rundown of that stuff.
Yeah, so the blue lines are just the curb lines. So some of it is new, some of it is existing. It's just a way to show what the final curb alignment will look like. Most of it, like I said, is the existing curb. The green are pavement markings, as are the white lines. So those greens shown here are conflict markings across driveways and intersections. The green in the lane is more for just bicycle pavement markings, make them a little more visible. And then the ones at the intermediate level bike lane, that was just a way to show on the plans where those will be. They may not necessarily be painted green during construction. It was just a way to communicate where those are. And the same thing with the red to the south, that's just to communicate that that's going to be a transit area, and what that looks like hasn't been designed yet.
Awesome, thank you. So we've gotten several questions about protection along the route. So just again, want to reiterate that we're early in the design phase, so we haven't selected the exact materials that we're going to use. There won't be a single material used throughout the corridor, so it'll be kind of case specific likely. And as we kind of make those decisions, we will kind of have other meetings that present those kind of more detailed decisions. Along Peachtree Place specifically, this is a constrained area, a lot of residential and commercial needs. It has the advantage of being a fairly low volume street. So where we can, we've created pickup and drop off zones. But we are in a constrained space. So again, where we can provide protection, we will. And in some cases, we might be limited in what we can do. So we just kind of have to advance the plan and see exactly what we're able to squeeze in and what makes sense. We've gotten a couple of questions as well about the Stratus project, which is 80 Peachtree Place. It's a large project that kind of abuts Peachtree Place, 10th Street, and Crescent. The proposed main entrance for this development for their parking deck is on 10th Street. There will be a loading deck on Peachtree Place. So while we do anticipate, you know, a slight change in traffic volumes, not so much that, you know, it's going to be kind of catastrophic to the area, according to the projections that we've seen. This is still a proposed development, so there's nothing kind of guaranteed at this point. We're coordinating with those developers in terms of how the proposed streetscape along Crescent progresses, the courtyard they have proposed for the Margaret Mitchell House. All those details are being taken into consideration, but from our team's perspective, you know, understanding that we live in a city that is developing, that there's a lot of density coming, and so to us it just kind of highlights the need to provide these dedicated and more protected spaces for people so that they can travel safely throughout the district and really enjoy the streets and all they have to offer. So we have a question about the alternatives on 10th Street and people who prefer to remain on 10th instead of taking the detour on Peachtree Place. So yeah, I mean, certainly just as today, if you are a fearless and confident rider and you want to proceed on 10th Street, that's certainly going to be an option for you moving forward. We don't anticipate, you know, any changes to 10th Street as a result of this project, but routing along Peachtree Place really gave us the opportunity to route people towards more destinations, retail, residential, Marta, and, you know, really presented a lot of opportunities for placemaking, taking advantage of those lower vehicular volumes. And in the grand scheme of things, what you get out of this route in terms of, you know, access to different amenities, the trade-off is a really, really small travel time delay. So it made sense. Let's see. All right, if we have any other questions, please pop them up. Where will the driveway for Stratus be located? You know, this is again a separate private development, not associated with this project, but they will have two curb cuts, one on 10th Street, which is a variance that they sought, so that the curb cut would be moved off of Crescent, which was, we think, of an advantage, and one on Peachtree Place. Again, they're still going through kind of the design process, so the final plans remain to be seen. I don't know how much we got into this, but as part of the Stratus development, Crescent will be turned into a one-way southbound street. It will be heavily oriented towards pedestrians, with a mixed-use path potentially for you know, bikes and pedestrians to travel safely down that stretch of path. So we had a question about people turning right on Crescent onto Peachtree Place to access William Street and 75. Maybe, but that doesn't seem like the most direct or preferable route. So yes, people can use the streets to get to different places, but I don't think that that would be the preferred way to get on 75 and 85. Chris or Jeff, can you speak to the bike delay that this routing suggested in our analysis?
Yes, I can speak to that. So the travel time we looked at for the route alternative 1 was going to be around 7 minutes from start to end. And that was a difference between the Myrtle and 8th route, which are going to be more like 9 or 9.5 minutes. When we took a look into the detailed analysis at the intersections of Juniper and Peachtree and Piedmont especially, where we've got those dedicated bike phases and movements, we saw, let's see, what's up right now? Yeah, we saw about a minute to a minute and a half of wait time across the total of 10th Street on average. And that of course will depend on when the cyclist arrives. It could be less.
Thanks, Jeff. So we have a question about what was learned from the pop-up bike lane on 10th Street that we did in, I believe it was 2019, 2018. So that was a really fun project. For those of you who remember, we did a kind of one of the city's first tactical urbanism projects and popped up a bike lane from the kind of end of the cycle track to Peachtree Street. We learned a lot about that project, but one of the key things that we learned was that you know, a bike lane along 10th Street in this section was demonstrably feasible, and that really the biggest thing we needed to focus on was signal optimization, which could really offset the additional travel time you know, incurred by people driving cars. So it was very valuable lessons learned from that project that will be utilized in the implementation of this one. Another question about bike detection at these intersections, and I think that's separate from the signalization at the intersection. So Jeff or Chris, can you speak to bike detection?
Yeah, so that will be selected in coordination with ATL DOT to make sure that we're using products that they're currently using elsewhere in the city and that they're happy with. It will most likely be passive detection in the form of video or something similar, so that cyclists are not required to have to push a button to activate it.
Yeah, thanks. Have a question about timeline. So timelines are always kind of hard to nail down. We are hoping to get to 30% on the design of this project in the next, several weeks, month or two. So we'll be coming back to the public when that's finished, and then we'll move on to 60-90% plans, which probably 6 months to a year. This project is on the TSPLOS list, so once we kind of have funding identified, we'll be able to move forward with more concrete timing. So if you have the opportunity to get out and vote on TSPLOS, please do. We've had several questions about kind of the details of the traffic analysis. There is both the full traffic analysis and a executive summary, just kind of a high-level digestive option that you can find at midtownatl.com/projects/central-midtown-connection-plan. So that's really where you can go to access all of the information associated with this project. So at the end of this presentation, you'll be able to get a link to the recorded version of this presentation. The question and answers will be posted there, as well as the multimodal traffic study. There will be the map exercise where you can review and comment on specific things throughout the corridor as well. And when we have future iterations of the design, those will be posted there as well. So keep an eye on that page. It's really a wealth of information. Several more questions about protection along Peachtree Place. Again, to reiterate, you know, we're going to provide protection where we can. The details of that protection have not been decided yet at this point. And, you know, again, where we can fit it, we will. Question about kind of the long-term vision for Peachtree Place. A few years ago, it was for a very slow pedestrian-focused street. Was this plan changed? No. In fact, this project really seeks to enhance the pedestrian experience along this corridor. One of the reasons why Peachtree Place bubbled up as the preferred route was because of its opportunities for placemaking. It's a lower car traffic volume street, so it's a great place to walk, really beautiful, and it links to Commercial Row Commons, which is going to be a great kind of plaza enhancement at the corner of Peachtree Place and Peachtree. And so yeah, kind of everything we're doing seeks to enhance the pedestrian experience along Peachtree Place. I think a lot of the times our conversations kind of get into the specifics of the bike lane route and the protection and everything associated with that design, but at the heart of our projects, the pedestrian experience is one of our top priorities. Question about the crosswalks on Peachtree Place outside of the Marta station and whether or not those will be raised. We are kind of still in the early phases of this project, so exactly what those crosswalks will be is still up for consideration. You know, we work in coordination with Marta and the tech trolley, and so we really seek to create a design that will work for everybody. So we'll see how those conversations progress and move forward with the best possible level of protection, and well, it's still functional. We've got about 5 more minutes left. Trying to scroll through to see if there are any questions that haven't been answered. Okay, I just found several. A question about an update on the West Peachtree bike lane. So this is kind of beyond the scope of this project. We are working to assist the city with implementing that project. If you have kind of want to stay up to date on the progress of the West Peachtree bike lane, we do have a project page for it, but that's a City of Atlanta project, and so yeah, we're kind of acting as an assistance arm for them in whatever way we can. So apologies, I can't give more detailed information than that, but there's a lot of moving parts. When will the 10th Street Bridge be fixed? That project is in its kind of final steps of design. So this is a project that will provide protection along Williams Street and on the 10th Street Bridge, again, a separate project. Does have a project page that you are welcome to visit by visiting Midtown ATL/projects. You can find it on that page. So that will be coming on in the next few years. So we're really excited about that one. All right, y'all. I think we got to all of the questions that were sent in, just kind of double checking. Again, if we didn't get to your question during this presentation, they will be posted to the project page. I do believe we've answered them to the best of our ability. Again, if you have no questions or kind of want to chat through some of the details in person, I will be out at 10th Street and Charles Allen on next week, double check, Wednesday of next week, I do believe, from 8:30 to 9:30, and then Friday of next week. So check out the Midtown Atlanta Midtown Transportation webpage for more information about that. Sorry, the 17th of next week. All right, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time, and we will keep you posted as things progress.